Our next speakers, Brendan Ferguson and Leah Armstrong, advocates for development of an Indigenous economy to drive sustainable social, cultural and economic participation and deliver self-determination for First Australians. The discussion will focus on Leah's experience and on some work that they've done together in recent months, bringing together the skills of Social Ventures Australia and Supply Nation. Please join me in welcoming Brendan and Leah to the stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone. We're going to sit on this red couch here to present the illusion of a sort of an engaged, relaxed, dynamic conversation.
Stay with that illusion for us, please.
I've drawn the short straw with the microphone. Leah's got the lapel. Leah and I would like to firstly acknowledge that we're meeting today on Gadigal country and like to recognise the contribution that Gadigal elders, past, present and future, are making to this country's cultural identity. I think in the lead up to today's event, I've been watching with interest the press coverage around the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York. And I've watched our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, speak at the United Nations. And she spoke, as you would expect, about conflict-ridden states such as Syria, South Sudan, Iraq. And she said, I'm just going to quote her, "There are nations for which the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda, indeed the promises of the UN Charter, appear remote or unachievable. We do not underestimate the challenges facing all of us. Equally, we should not downplay the opportunities." So I think Leah and I would like to adopt Mrs. Bishop's words, but we'd like to shift the focus a little bit to the challenges and opportunities that we face in supporting the sustainable development of several hundred First Australian nations. I think most of us, or many of us, would be very familiar with some of the key data points in the recent Closing the Gap report. We know that non-Indigenous Australians are likely to outlive First Australians by 10 years. We know that there's been negligible progress, if any, in addressing or closing the gap on reading, writing and numeracy standards for First Australian children. And we know that the employment rate amongst First Australians has dipped to 48% compared to 77% in the mainstream. So Australia ranks second on the UN Development Index, and First Australians, if taken as a discrete nation state, would rank 122nd. So we've clearly got some pretty big challenges in our own backyard in terms of addressing or meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, and I've spoken specifically about Goals 3, 4 and 8 there in terms of those data points. But perhaps, I suppose what Leah and I are suggesting is maybe we need to shift the conversation away from the challenges and the deficits and actually start talking about some of the opportunities in supporting social, cultural and economic development for First Australians. So I'm going to ask Leah a few questions, help us understand how we might harness the economic potential for First Australians. So I'm going to start, Leah, by asking you to describe what it might be like for a young First Australian girl growing up in a disadvantaged household.
Great, thanks Brendan. As you've already indicated, those data points are indisputable here in Australia, but I think we need to also focus on the human context, and therefore I'd like to paint a picture for you, and if you bear with me, of a young First Australian girl who is born into a family with higher smoking and alcohol abuse. She lives in an overcrowded house, and which affects her ability to get a good night's sleep. And when she wakes in the morning to go to school, she may not have enough food in her household before she goes to school. Her attendance at school is very low, and her chances of leaving school with the adequate levels of literacy and numeracy, enough to get her a job, are even greater. Her parents have been on welfare benefits and are long-term unemployed, so she has no working role models. Her identity is shaped by the deficit perceptions and the circumstances she lives in, and she has limited connection to her country and to her understanding of her Aboriginal identity. The life she imagines is to leave school, to fall pregnant at a very early and young age, to go on to welfare benefits and try to raise her children the best she can in these circumstances. So that's the human context that we are dealing with.
So if I then look to your personal experience, you grew up in Mackay in a large entrepreneurial Torres Strait Islander family. What sort of opportunities were available to you that perhaps aren't available to the girl that you've just described?
I have to say I've been very fortunate. I've grown up with very strong cultural identity and values. We as a family, a very large Torres Strait Islander family, practice our cultural identity every week and weekend through fishing and hunting for our foods and through celebrations or family gatherings where we had, traditional dancing and cultural foods. My grandmother, who just turned 98 yesterday, and my mother are very strong women who have kept our family grounded. But not only that, they are seen as the matriarchs for many other community members and other family members as well. My grandfather, my uncles, my brothers have been really entrepreneurial. You might not believe this, but my grandfather was a travelling showman who had a snake pit of death and taught many Queenslanders how to treat snake bites. My uncles have had fishing trawlers. They even established their own croc farm, machinery hire, crane hire. So, I've actually grown up in a very entrepreneurial family. But they also, as a broad, big family, had worked in other industries around Mackay and so had connections into the broader non-Indigenous community as well. But we also brought up with a sense of giving back to communities. So we also, looked after other less fortunate community members. And I guess attending school, getting an education, having a job and working hard in our family was the norm. And we all aspired to owning our own home. So my circumstances is really quite the opposite in terms of what many young Indigenous girls are facing today.
Am I right in saying that your grandfather actually milked the venom from taipans?
Yes, yes. So if you've ever bitten by a taipan, you can thank my grandfather for milking them.
So I suppose with a bit of a sense of some of the opportunities that you had, why is the development of First Australian enterprises so important to creating those opportunities?
Yeah, look, certainly, I guess unfortunately, the prevailing image of First Australians is seen through what we say the deficit or the negative view. And the majority of responses that are, solutions or devised are actually around welfare reform. And I believe this actually traps people into the welfare dependency. Therefore, I believe it is critical that we begin to disrupt this perception of First Australians and inspire their entrepreneurial spirit, to change the perceptions from being passive recipients of government welfare to actually self-determining nations who have choice and control, from economic consumers to economic contributors, and changing narrow mindsets to opening up their minds and the opportunities in the hearts, and from living in despair to living with hope. And when we change these perceptions and create opportunities for First Australians, and in particular for new enterprises, we know that beyond the economic benefits of enterprises, First Australian enterprises will employ Indigenous people 100 times more than non-Indigenous enterprises. These First Australian enterprises reconnect their Indigenous staff to their culture, and they have a very strong emphasis of instilling pride in their local communities and investing back into their local communities. So I really believe that, enterprise development has a very strong outcome for First Australians.
You spent 18 years running an organisation in Newcastle called Yarntine with a focus on training, employment, enterprise development. What did you learn in terms of the barriers that First Australian entrepreneurs currently face, and how might we overcome those barriers?
Yeah. When we established Yarntine in the early 90s, we faced very similar barriers that most First Australian enterprises face today in the form of human, social and financial capital constraints. So First Australians enterprises actually lack business skills and expertise. and they lack access to ongoing capacity building support. And also there are no sort of economic or enterprising role models in their communities that they can look to. I guess access to capital is a particular barrier or challenge for First Australians, given that many First Australians do not have personal assets from which they can leverage, and the community and the land which we have, which is held in community title, cannot be used as collateral to raise finance. There is a perceived, I guess, greater risk of investing in First Australian enterprises, and First Australian enterprises also face the challenges of building networks and accessing market opportunities, which is even more, I guess, highly remote in remote communities. So these are the challenges. But Yarntine overcame these challenges by partnering with a business partner to gain the skills and knowledge, by accessing concessional grant capital and finance capital. And also our business partner became a mentor and actually helped our managers to develop those skills and networks that is quite vital to any enterprise. So those types of support, I guess, have been also confirmed in our recent work with Social Ventures Australia, when we have been sort of running a pilot program on Indigenous Social Enterprise Fund. And out of this, we have actually developed a new initiative, which is about building a new economy for First Australians. And this new initiative is being led by First Australians, called First Australian Capital. I guess FAC, or First Australians Capital, our goal and aim is to provide budding enterprises and entrepreneurs with business advisory support, business finance and access to networks and industry market opportunities, enabling them to incubate and grow an idea or an enterprise to become a viable and sustainable business. So what is actually needed, we believe is needed, is more business mentors and advisory on a pro bono service. And if you are in a company or you work in a large corporation, look at how you can include First Australian businesses into your supply chains and open up new market opportunities. And the third thing is actually having impact or investment or concessional development finance to help Indigenous businesses get up and running. So those are the areas.
I want to, I suppose, finish by referring us back to the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of the conversation we've had so far has been specifically focused on Goal 8, which is around economic development and employment opportunities. Interested, Leah, to ask why you think that empowering First Australians in the way that we've been describing will actually have a broader effect and help us to address a number of the Sustainable Development Goals rather than simply, Goal 8.
Yes, certainly. And again, I'd like to sort of draw on an example that if you can imagine a First Australian enterprise being established in cultural and environment industries or knowledge areas, we are contributing back to sustainable and land management and practices in water management. We contribute to also then maintaining our cultural connection to the country and our cultural identity. So that's very strong in Indigenous enterprises, which in turn creates more jobs for First Australians, leading to greater economic independence and healthy lives. Outcomes for education are improved and valued. Education is actually valued as they lead to self-reliance for Aboriginal and First Australians. And they improve opportunities for First Australian girls and women. Therefore, over time, that young First Australian girl that we first spoke of witnesses working role models. And she begins to imagine her future as a worker, as a business owner, and starts to create and start saving wealth for her family. This then contributes back into the community, and her family is on the path to breaking the welfare and poverty cycle. This in turn, we believe, can disrupt the negative perceptions of First Australians and acknowledge that we're contributing to our nation's overall sustainability development goals.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Leah. And Whitney, I'm going to assume that you're going to lead the questions rather than me. Is that,
Actually,
we're out of time?
We're out of time.
That's
for
fine.
questions, but you're coming back for the discussion.
Correct.
So we'll get to that then.
We're on a panel.
I
We
beg your
can
pardon,
chat
everyone.
on the panel.
Yes, and if you have questions that we don't get to, I do encourage you at lunch to find Brendan and Leah and approach them directly. But thanks both to you, Brendan and Leah. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.